There is a persistent belief that Germany lost the Second World War because it was simply outnumbered and outproduced by larger enemies. According to this view, German forces fought with superior skill and tactical excellence, but were eventually overwhelmed by the sheer weight of Allied resources. This narrative, while containing elements of truth, fundamentally misunderstands why Germany lost the war. The reality is more complex and more instructive for anyone seeking to understand how modern wars are actually won and lost. Germany did not lose because its enemies had more soldiers and factories, though they did. Germany lost because tactical excellence, no matter how refined, cannot compensate for strategic incompetence, logistical impossibility, and structural contradictions built into the entire war effort from the beginning. This is Mechanics of War, where we analyze not just who won wars, but why military systems succeed or collapse. Today, we examine why Germany's remarkable tactical capabilities were never sufficient to achieve victory, and why they were perhaps never intended to achieve the kind of victory that could be sustained. To understand this paradox, we must first acknowledge what the German military did exceptionally well. The Wehrmacht that invaded Poland in September 1939 was, in many ways, the most tactically sophisticated military force in the world. This sophistication was not simply a matter of having better equipment, though German armor and aircraft were indeed formidable. It was a question of doctrine, training, and command philosophy. At the heart of German tactical success was a concept called Auftragstaktik, or mission-type command. Rather than issuing detailed instructions that subordinate officers were expected to follow precisely, German commanders communicated the overall objective and allowed junior officers considerable freedom in how they achieved it. This decentralized decision-making gave German forces a tempo of operations that routinely outpaced their opponents. Combined with this command philosophy was a sophisticated understanding of combined arms warfare. German doctrine integrated infantry, armor, artillery, and air support into coordinated operations where each element reinforced the others. The panzer divisions that spearheaded German offensives were not simply tank units. They were combined arms formations that included mechanized infantry, self-propelled artillery, engineers, and reconnaissance units, all trained to operate together seamlessly. When German forces attacked, they did so with multiple supporting elements synchronized to create effects greater than the sum of their parts. The German officer corps was highly professional, rigorously trained, and selected based on demonstrated competence rather than social class alone. Staff officers understood operational planning at a level that impressed even their enemies. Unit commanders were expected to lead from the front and demonstrate tactical flexibility under pressure. The result was a military that could execute complex operations with precision and adapt quickly when initial plans encountered obstacles. These capabilities were demonstrated dramatically in the early campaigns. Poland fell in 27 days despite having a substantial army and defensible terrain. France, which possessed more tanks than Germany and was considered by many observers to have the finest army in Europe, was defeated in 6 weeks. The opening phases of Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union, saw German forces advance hundreds of kilometers and encircle entire Soviet armies in massive pocket battles that captured millions of prisoners. At the tactical level, German forces consistently outperformed their opponents throughout 1939, 1940, and much of 1941. Yet, even as these victories were being achieved, the fundamental strategic contradictions that would doom Germany were already apparent to careful observers. The gap between tactical capability and strategic coherence
was not a flaw that emerged over time, it was present from the beginning. German military planning was superb at the operational level, the level of campaigns and major operations. Generals like Manstein, Guderian, and Model demonstrated genuine brilliance in planning and executing complex maneuvers. But at the strategic level, the level of overall war aims and the coordination of military operations with political objectives and economic capacity, German planning was remarkably deficient. There was no coherent long-term strategy for actually winning the war against the coalition of enemies Germany created.
Consider the invasion of the Soviet Union. From a tactical and operational perspective, Barbarossa was a masterpiece of planning. The initial deployments, the coordination of multiple army groups, the logistics of assembling millions of men and thousands of vehicles on the border, all of this was executed with impressive competence. But at the strategic level, the operation made little sense. Germany was already at war with Britain. It had no clear path to defeating Britain or forcing a peace. Opening a second front against the largest country in the world, with its vast distances and enormous population and substantial industrial capacity, meant fighting a multi-front war of attrition that Germany could not win. The decision to invade the Soviet Union was driven primarily by ideology rather than strategic calculation. Hitler's racial theories and his obsession with acquiring living space in the East overrode all military logic. Professional military planners raised concerns about supply lines, about the distances involved, about what would happen if the Soviet Union did not collapse quickly as predicted. These concerns were dismissed or ignored. The war Germany needed to fight, a short, decisive campaign leading to rapid political collapse, was very different from the war it actually faced, a multi-year struggle of industrial attrition across vast territories. This pattern of ideology overriding military reality repeated throughout the war. Cities were designated as fortresses to be held at all costs, leading to entire armies being encircled and destroyed when a tactical retreat would have preserved forces for future operations. Offensives were launched for symbolic or ideological reasons rather than military necessity. Resources were diverted to projects like the Holocaust that not only consumed manpower and transportation capacity, but alienated potential allies and stiffened enemy resolve. The strategic incoherence was compounded by logistical realities that German planning consistently underestimated or ignored. Modern mechanized warfare consumes resources at a prodigious rate. Tanks and trucks require fuel, spare parts, maintenance, and trained crews. Artillery expends ammunition. Aircraft need airfields, fuel, bombs, and skilled pilots. All of this must be transported to the front, often across hundreds or thousands of kilometers. Germany's logistical system was never adequate for the wars it fought. The Reich had limited domestic oil production and depended heavily on Romanian oil fields and synthetic fuel plants. As the war progressed and these sources were bombed or captured, fuel shortages became crippling. By 1944, German tank crews were receiving minimal training because there was insufficient fuel for practice. Luftwaffe pilots flew combat missions with far fewer flight hours than their Allied counterparts. Aircraft sat grounded not because they were damaged, but because there was no fuel to fly them. The rail system, which was the backbone of German logistics, faced chronic problems. German railways used a different gauge than Soviet railways, which meant that as German forces advanced into the Soviet Union, supplies had to be unloaded and reloaded at the border, or the rail lines had to be converted, a time-consuming process. Trains could move supplies efficiently within Germany, but beyond the Reich's borders, logistics became increasingly improvised and inadequate. The industrial base supporting the German war effort was substantial,
but never sufficient for the wars being fought. Germany mobilized for total war later than its enemies and never achieved the production levels necessary to replace losses and maintain technological parity across all theaters. While German factories produced excellent individual weapons systems, they could not produce them in the quantities needed. A Tiger tank might be superior to a Sherman tank in direct combat, but if the United States could produce 5 Shermans for every Tiger Germany produced, the tactical superiority of the Tiger became strategically irrelevant. Supply lines stretched across vast distances created vulnerabilities that German tactical skill could not overcome. During the advance into the Soviet Union, panzer divisions that were supposed to live off the land found themselves in regions where the agricultural infrastructure had been destroyed or the harvest had failed. Troops went hungry. Horses, which the German army relied on extensively for transport, died in massive numbers from lack of fodder. The image of the German military as fully mechanized is misleading. The Wehrmacht depended heavily on horse-drawn transport, which proved catastrophically inadequate for the distances and conditions of the Eastern Front. The logistical constraints were not simply inconveniences, they determined what was operationally possible. German forces in the Soviet Union repeatedly reached points where further advance was impossible, not because of enemy resistance, but because the supply system could not keep up. The offensive would halt, allowing Soviet forces time to regroup and prepare defenses. The tempo that was so effective in France, where distances were manageable and infrastructure was good, could not be sustained in the vastness of Russia. Leadership failures compounded these systemic problems. Hitler's increasing interference in military operations, particularly after the Winter Crisis of 1941, introduced a level of dysfunction into German command that negated many of the advantages of Auftragstaktik. The Führer directive system, where Hitler personally made key operational decisions, often based on ideological considerations rather than military reality, created chaos in the command structure. Generals who advocated for tactical withdrawals to preserve forces were dismissed. Officers who demonstrated initiative that contradicted Hitler's intentions were punished rather than rewarded. The very flexibility and adaptability that had made the German military effective was increasingly constrained by a command structure that demanded absolute obedience to decisions made by a leader with no formal military training and an increasingly detached understanding of battlefield realities. Germany also lacked a unified command structure coordinating all aspects of the war effort. There was no equivalent to the Anglo-American combined chiefs of staff. The German High Command was fragmented, with the Army, Navy, and Air Force often operating with minimal coordination. Resources were allocated inefficiently, with competing fiefdoms and personal empires within the Nazi hierarchy directing production and deployment. Strategic planning, to the extent it existed, was reactive rather than proactive, responding to crises rather than implementing a coherent vision for victory. The economic and industrial dimension reveals perhaps the most fundamental reason for German defeat. Germany entered the war with an economy that was not on a total war footing. Civilian production continued at substantial levels well into 1942. Luxury goods were still being manufactured when the military desperately needed more ammunition and spare parts. The transition to total war mobilization came late, and even when it occurred, Germany could not match the industrial output of its enemies. The Soviet Union, despite losing vast territories and industrial centers in the initial German invasion, relocated factories to the Urals and maintained production of tanks, aircraft, and artillery that exceeded German output. The United States, protected by oceans and never facing invasion, built an industrial system that produced military equipment in quantities that seemed almost fantastical. Britain, though smaller in population and industrial base than Germany, mobilized its economy more effectively and earlier. The production figures tell a stark story. In 1944, Germany produced approximately 40,000 aircraft. The Soviet Union produced 40,000 aircraft. The United States produced 100,000 aircraft. The same pattern holds for tanks, trucks, artillery, and every other category of military hardware. German quality, which was often superior, could not compensate for Allied quantity. A single well-made German tank destroyer might kill several Allied tanks, but if there were always more Allied tanks coming, the outcome was inevitable. German enemies adapted, while German doctrine became increasingly rigid. The Red Army of 1941 was unrecognizable compared to the Red Army of 1941. Soviet commanders learned operational art, adopted combined arms coordination, and developed deep battle doctrine that matched and in some ways exceeded German sophistication. They learned to avoid German strengths and exploit German weaknesses. Rather than attempting to defeat German forces in open maneuver warfare, where the Wehrmacht excelled, Soviet forces learned to pin German units in place and then overwhelm them with concentrated firepower and numerical superiority. The Western Allies similarly adapted. The disasters of 1940 and early 1941 were learning experiences. By 1944, Allied forces in Normandy were employing combined arms tactics, close air support coordination, and operational planning that neutralized many German tactical advantages. They used their overwhelming material superiority intelligently, learning when to avoid German strongpoints and when to simply overwhelm them with firepower. Strategic bombing, while controversial in its effectiveness and morality, forced Germany to divert enormous resources to air defense. Thousands of anti-aircraft guns that could have been used against Soviet tanks were instead pointing at the sky. Fighter aircraft, desperately needed on the Eastern Front, had to defend German cities. The bombing campaign did not cripple German production as decisively as its advocates claimed, but it imposed costs that Germany could not afford. Germany was caught in an attrition trap from which there was no escape. Wars of attrition are won by the side that can replace losses while maintaining or improving quality. Germany could do neither. Every experienced officer, pilot, or tank crew killed was increasingly difficult to replace with someone of equal competence. Training time was shortened because there was no time. Equipment quality declined because factories were being bombed and raw materials were scarce. The German military was bleeding expertise at every level. The junior officers and NCOs who had made Auftragstaktik effective were dead or captured. Replacements were younger, less experienced, given abbreviated training. Veteran panzer divisions that once spearheaded offensives were ground down to shadows of their former strength. The Luftwaffe lost not just aircraft, but irreplaceable pilots who had years of experience. By 1944, a German pilot might have 20 flight hours before being sent into combat against Allied pilots who had hundreds of hours of training. The decline in troop quality was especially evident in the units raised in the final year of the war. Volkssturm militias, composed of old men and boys, were given minimal training and inadequate weapons and sent to defend against Soviet offensives. These formations had none of the tactical sophistication that had characterized German forces earlier in the war. They were simply bodies thrown into the path of advancing armies, and they were slaughtered accordingly. The conclusion to be drawn from Germany's experience in the Second World War is clear. Tactical brilliance cannot compensate for strategic failure. Operational excellence cannot overcome logistical impossibility. Professional military competence cannot substitute for coherent war aims aligned with available resources. Germany built a military that was superb at winning battles, but was never structured to win the war it chose to fight. The German officer corps excelled at tactics and operations because that was what they were trained for and what they valued. But war is not just battles and campaigns. War is economics, logistics, industrial production, alliance management, and political strategy. Germany's leadership, dominated by ideology and a fundamental contempt for these unglamorous realities, created a military system optimized for short, victorious wars against isolated opponents. When forced into a prolonged multi-front war of attrition with enemies with greater resources who learned from their defeats, that system had no answer. Modern militaries still study German tactical doctrine from the Second World War. Auftragstaktik remains influential. Combined arms coordination and operational maneuver are standard practice. The campaigns in Poland, France, and early Barbarossa are analyzed in staff colleges worldwide. But these same institutions also study why Germany lost, because the lessons are equally valuable. They teach that tactical and operational excellence must be nested within coherent strategy, that logistics determines what is possible far more than tactical skill, that industrial capacity and economic mobilization are not peripheral concerns, but central to modern warfare, that wars are won by systems and societies, not just by armies. There is no triumphalism in Germany's defeat, only the cold mathematics of industrial warfare and the consequences of strategic miscalculation. The German military performed its tactical mission with often remarkable competence, but the strategic framework within which it operated was fundamentally flawed, and no amount of tactical skill could correct for that flaw. The war was lost not in 1945 when the Reich finally collapsed, but in the strategic decisions made years earlier, decisions that created obligations Germany could never fulfill and enemies it could never defeat. This is the essential lesson. Military power is not simply about fighting capability. It is about the alignment of means and ends, the coherence of strategy and resources, the ability to sustain operations over time while degrading the enemy's ability to do the same. Germany had some of the finest soldiers and officers in the world. It pioneered tactics and operational methods that changed warfare, and it lost comprehensively because tactics and operations, divorced from sound strategy and adequate resources, lead only to impressive defeats rather than sustainable victory.